So welcome to the 12th Annual College Town Summit. My name is Michelle Flagg with the Industry Education Division at the Illinois Liquor Control Commission. Our Executive Director, Chima Inyo, will bring greetings.
Good morning, everyone. I wanted to take an opportunity this morning to say welcome to the 12th Annual College Town Summit. I would like to thank the commissioners who joined and who supported this event, as well as Michelle, who's been an excellent organizer and coordinator and lead, and all the staff that have worked very hard and diligently to make this event possible. Most importantly, I wanted to thank the attendees and the panelists who are participating in this event. We are indeed in unprecedented times. The challenges that we've all had to work through, whether it be professional, whether it be personal with our families and sending our kids to college or working in that environment, still with the undertone of making sure that our core mission at the Commission, which is to protect the health and safety of all of our residents, is upheld. And so with that, we wanted to forge through. This is the first all virtual College Town Summit that we've done. Historically, we've done them in person. And I just wanted to thank everyone for doing a yeoman's job in bringing this to fruition. The information that's going to be shared today is critical. I really, sometimes, in government, folks have a tendency to regulate from an ivory tower, and that's never what our policy and our practice has been. We understand that every decision that we make and the information that we share and how we educate all of our stakeholders in the industry saves lives, and it protects families, and it helps individuals who need the assistance to get over either addiction or other challenges that result from the consumption of alcohol. So with that being said, again, I just want to thank everyone for their hard work, for their understanding and willingness to forge through and be innovative and figure out a way to get everybody on the video conference this morning and commit the time to really continuing our mission despite it all. We are all resilient, and it can't be stated enough that we appreciate your time and welcome the dialogue. This is an open forum to have conversation and to share thoughts and ideas and best practices. And we encourage that, and we would like to keep the conversation going on for many, many months to come and finish this year strong and revamp, and we'll see you all next year for the 13th annual. So with that being said, thank you again. Thank you, Michelle. Thank you, commissioners. Thank you to the stakeholders and panelists, and we look forward to having an awesome 12th Annual College Town Summit. Thanks, Michelle.
Thank you, Director Chima. Sorry. Beginning at 9:45, workshops will run concurrently and have been divided into 5 topical tracks to assist attendees looking for specific areas of interest. For servers, we will have a Bassett Town Hall meeting moderated by Lee Rupus, our Bassett manager. Beverage, alcohol, sellers, and servers education training, Bassett, is the state of Illinois' responsible beverage server program. This session is organized to solicit ideas on Bassett improvements from community stakeholders and the liquor industry. Our youth outreach in light of COVID, social media and alternative methods workshop will be led by Dion McGill with the Youth Substance Use Prevention Coalition and the Ann and Robert H. Lurie Children's Hospital of Chicago. Dion will be presenting with Emily Jade Aguilar, a Youth Advisory Board consultant. Our Drugs and Alcohol, What's Missing in Prevention session will be led by Bryan Wright, founder and owner of Dynamic Family Solutions, LLC. This session will teach key stakeholders in youth development the necessary techniques to expose, educate, and even combat substance abuse in their community, as well as second chance alternatives to punitive sentencing for underage drinking, vaping, and drug use. Our Changing the College Experience, Promoting Safety and Healthy Choices session will be led by Rita Kreslin and Samantha Gallagher with AAIM, the Alliance Against Intoxicated Motorists. I met Rita through the Impaired Driving Task Force here in Illinois. And they have a fundraiser coming up, which I'm sure she'll tell you about in their session. You can learn about sober parties with Jake White from Vive 18. This session will cover the tools and techniques for hosting a sober house party. All of the sessions that I just mentioned will take place from 9:45 to 10:45. We will have a 15-minute break or cushion depending upon how the transition works out. And then at 11 o'clock, we will have our last presentation geared towards servers, although everyone can participate. Fake IDs in the COVID pandemic with Susan Dorick, CEO of Real Identities LLC. This session will teach you how to prevent underage access and protect yourself and your business from the consequences caused by fake IDs. I will start the breakout sessions and then I will assign you to a breakout session, and then you will be able to move to that session. It'll prompt you to join the session. And so I'll get started with that now. So just give me a couple of minutes to navigate that, and then we'll get started. Yep.
Okay, cool. Good morning. Hi, everyone. I feel like I'm missing out on something in the Bassett room. I feel like that's where the party is, but I actually already have my Bassett. So unfortunately, I've never gotten it with Lee, but I've met and chatted with Lee a few times. Really great personality. So good morning. Allow me to introduce myself, and then we'll go ahead and get started in this chat. I'm Deon McGill. I'm the Communications and Community Outreach Manager with both Strengthening Chicago's Youth and the Youth Substance Use Prevention Coalition, both convened by Anna Robert H. Lurie Children's Hospital of Chicago. And so I do the communications, both internal and external, as well as oversee all of the community outreach that happens between those two organizations on behalf of Lurie going out into the community. So we're going to be talking. I would like for this to be more of a conversation about substance use prevention and outreach during COVID. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to give you a brief overview of kind of what we've done, and then if anyone has specific questions or specific topics, I love talking social media, I love talking communications, I can do it all day. 1 hour is never going to be enough time for me, but I definitely want to give you information or maybe insight, or at least have some conversations that will be helpful to all of you specifically. So I'm keeping an eye on the chat box. And I don't know if I've never really used WebEx. I don't know if it has a raise hand function or anything like that. But if you kind of want to give me a cue that, I have a question and you want to unmute yourself to ask that question as well, that's fine. Please feel free. Also, I wanted to mention two people that are also in the room, and they may have some insights as well. One of them is Miss Linda Gordon. Linda is the outreach coordinator for the Substance Use Prevention Coalition at Lurie Children's Hospital. She does a lot of work with the Youth Advisory Board, which I'll speak about in one moment, as well as outreach for the violence prevention in the Lurie Children's Research Center. So she may have some insights. So Linda, please feel free to pop in any moment. And also Miss Genevieve Soto is also in the room. Genevieve is a therapist that works at an organization here in the city. She's actually participated in one of the events we had during this COVID, doing social media outreach on substance use prevention. And she has tons of great insight when it comes to issues of trauma and mental health, and how that can be how you can use social media and use your outreach during COVID to address those issues in a positive fashion. So if Genevieve, if you have any insights, any moments, please feel free to pop in the chat box, or just give me a motion if you want to pop in as well. So at the Youth Substance Use Prevention Coalition, we were very lucky when COVID kicked in, because we already very heavily relied on social media specifically and electronic communications to get our message out. We actually were in the third or fourth year, the numbers are bad with me, of a communication campaign that was initially physically based, like buses, train stations, things of that nature. And then it pivoted in the last 2 years to specifically in person, which was in schools. We had posters, flyers, things of that nature, and social media based. And I can show you some examples of that in a moment. And also, actually, let me go ahead and pop in the chat box if you can see it there. I'm actually going to put the handle of the communication campaign. So Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, they're all the exact same name at I Got This Chicago. You can actually just pull up a second window and take a look at some of that stuff, but I'll be sure to share so you can kind of see as we're talking about it real quick. But we have, as I mentioned, those social media platforms. And also we had the addition, unfortunately, she wasn't able to make it today, of a youth consultant. And that youth consultant came in with youthful ideas. If you ever work with me, you hear me say this very often. I am not a 18-year-old or 20-year-old. I don't think like an 18-year-old. So when it comes to creating content that appeals to teenagers, I can be inventive, but when we had a youth consultant come in and someone who was in that age demographic, and we did pay them for their time, our social media metrics kind of went through the roof. She had great ideas that we instituted into our social media. In addition to the social media platforms, TikTok was an addition that
Dion,
Yes.
I was going to pop in and say, I was thinking of the Boo, the campaign that you guys had last year,
Yes,
because I think Emily was part of that. The Boo, it was coming up the spooky like drink or something like that, but it was non-alcoholic.
Yes.
So the contest to come up for that.
Yeah,
absolutely.
And that kind of is why I had the idea for this, because if you follow I Got This Chicago, you'll see that they have a lot of innovative ideas that will help to engage. And then that was the other thing too that we, because that's when I met Genevieve over the summer, of course virtually, but it was for the alcohol-free Tuesday tea. So definitely coming up with innovative ideas to engage in light of COVID. And I'll drop off.
No, you're fine, and I appreciate that. Can you actually see my screen now?
Yes.
Okay, so this is actually the event you just mentioned, and I'll be the first one to say this was completely Emily's idea. Like if I'll see if I can pull up the Boo Party, or it was actually a Halloween themed drinks, mocktails, non-alcoholic drinks, and so Emily came up with that. She actually makes fun of me all the time because when she came over to the organization, I was sharing a lot of the mayor's posts and different posts from different organizations, and they were all about drink water, drink water, drink water. And she goes, "People get tired of drinking water. We got to change that." And I was like, "Well, to what?" That was like my first reaction. And she came in and did things like alcohol-free Tuesday tea. We sometimes had coffee themed things, and then the mocktails. And so we would actually post mocktail recipes, and then we actually had a contest where the winner with the best drink would film themselves a video of the drink, and then we actually had the winner came into Lure Children's and actually made the drink for the staff, and we recorded it, and it was actually really fun. And so those are the kind of ideas that to me help with your outreach, your substance use prevention outreach, and kind of takes it to just another level. And I'll be the first person to admit that that's not necessarily how my brain works. And those would not necessarily have been ideas that I would have come up with on my own. And one thing I'll also mention is that when COVID began, we also did a very strong pivot. And Genevieve, you may have some insight with this as well. We did a really strong pivot from our content to the content having a very strong lean to on mental health. And we kind of made it a point as we were creating content to kind of talk about self-care, mental health, things of that nature, because at the time we were all just kind of going through, especially early on in this pandemic, we didn't know what was going on. Everyone was having a really tough time. And a great idea was Emily had the idea of doing a dance party. And so we ended up doing, this is another example, and this was actually for National Prevention Week. And we did a virtual dance party. I think it had about 35 participants when it was all said and done. One of them being the medical director at Lurie Children's. It was a lot of fun, a big success, and it kind of just helped people blow off steam. Genevieve, if you had anything to pop in on that topic.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you again, Dion and Michelle, for the invitation. So yeah, there's definitely a lot of things that were going on when we first started the pandemic. I was at that time with DePaul University, and we were looking for ways to reach out to students. So definitely things that were creative that allowed students to kind of stay engaged, make sure that they were not just kind of staying at home and being safe, but also making sure that they weren't bored, which typically tends to affect mental health, which typically also tends to affect use. So in that regard, looking at different things like what are some activities, we did kind of brainstorm a few things. I know, Diane, you mentioned the dance party, which is usually pretty cool. We also, even just on a personal perspective, with family and friends, started to use things like music sessions via Zoom. So we would kind of set up a time to meet, enjoy either, mocktails or even dinner, depending on what your preferences. For us, food is a big thing, so food was the main driver there. And then using things like music, we would kind of take turns playing music from our phones, right, on top of being on our computers, and people would have to guess where does this song come from, where does it take you in your childhood, where does it take you in your lifetime. Some of them, of course, took us back to teenage years, dating. Memories that we probably hadn't thought about in a long time. So just promoting good vibes and good emotions.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for that. And I was actually trying to one other thing I wanted to mention specifically, and if as I mentioned before, if anyone has any questions, specific questions, please feel free to pop those into the chat box. One key component of the Youth Substance Use Prevention Coalition is that we actually have a youth advisory board, and the youth advisory board came together. I want to say in January was when it really started, so it was really fresh and new moving into this COVID period. The picture that you're looking at right now was what we call Gen Zero. So Gen Zero was the youth who were brought together to create the Youth Advisory Board. They created the application process. They went through the applications. They did all those things. But when COVID came, we had this new group of 10 youth that we weren't super familiar with on a personal level. So when we began using Zoom, specifically, one thing I wanted to mention is that we also utilize our youth consultants, which we have two, and the youth consultants are go-betweens between us, the staff at Lurie, and the youth who have jobs and also are going to school, and there can be a lot of kind of like emailing and texting and things of that nature. So that was something that really helped us so that we can kind of keep outreach with our youth board. And then we have monthly meetings with them, and we also do those meetings in the evening. So I know that this comes up a lot. A lot of people are interested in the Youth Advisory Board, but one thing I learned early on is that you can't meet during those normal business hours when you're working with youth because they're in school. So our meetings are from 5 to 7, but it has been a great benefit of keeping them and having that youth focus, which is what SubC is moving towards. We want to be completely youth focused ultimately, and let them drive our coalition as it moves forward. I saw a raised hand, so if that person wants to pop in, if you want to type in, or if you want to go ahead and unmute. Okay. I saw I didn't catch the name that the raised hand was, but if that person wants to pop into the box, please let me know, or you can unmute and go ahead and ask your question. I definitely want to answer any questions. I know we have a short period of time. Like I said, I can talk about social media and outreach for days, as Michelle already knows.
Okay. Question, and
Yes.
and Jody from Prevention, you feel free to chime in as well. How do you recruit your youth participants?
So Oh, I'm sorry. If the other person wants to go ahead. I know there was someone from Venture Partnerships, I believe.
No, this is all about you, Dion. Go ahead and tell everybody how you recruit your youth.
That's the worst thing in the world. No. So we are Gen Zero came through a partnership. We have a very strong partnership with an organization in Chicago called Voices of Youth in Chicago Education. So Voice helped us recruit the youth for Gen Zero. And then once the application, everything went out, we actually posted the application online. I can't remember the exact number of applications we got. Linda, if you remember that number, go ahead and pop it in the chat box. But we got a lot of, it's actually interesting. We got a lot of feedback from the application online. And actually, one of our most viewed pictures is actually the one you're looking at right now. That picture got around 5,000 impressions and reach and got shared a bunch of times, partially because the youth were doing what youth does, which is share with their friends and share with their friends. And then from there, the youth went through the applications, interviewed the people, stuff that I never been able to do as a teenager. And they actually chose the youth board. So our youth board is actually youth chosen as well. And then the Lurie staff came in, met them, and we already had some set upon goals and things of that nature, and agreed partnerships, and we went from there. So that's actually how we recruited our board. If you did something different, Jody, we'd love to hear it for sure.
Can I chime in, Dion?
Absolutely.
Hello, everyone. I'm Linda. I am the outreach coordinator. I work really, really close with our youth advisory board. I actually was in the process of, developing, helping them develop these type of skills with interviewing their peers and things of that nature. So I went through this entire process with them. One way we recruited our youth as well, we have a workforce development program at Lurie Children's. And so some of the young people from our workforce development program actually was a part of our youth consultant board. So that was another way that we recruited, and it was a really unique way. And we also recruited within our organization because there's a lot of departments that are already working with youth. So we also recruited within our organization. And if anyone have youth advisory boards, we would love to collaborate. We're all about collaboration. So we've already collaborated with one of our coalition members. They were wanting to develop a youth advisory board. So I helped them to develop their youth advisory board. So they're up and going now. Their coalition is called Asian Health Coalition. So if anyone wants to partner, that will be amazing. And I think we're looking to actually develop a best practice toolkit on how to develop a youth advisory board. So if anyone have any questions, please reach out to me. I'll put my information in the chat box, and you can also reach out to Dion as well.
Thank you so much, Linda. Thank you. Linda's so much better with all of that information than I am. One other thing I wanted to also add, one thing I've noticed, because I do a lot of social media, I did social media for a nonprofit prior to coming to Lurie Children's as well. And one thing I will say for any organization, especially during this period of time, is simply to be very authentic in the content that you're creating and putting forth. That was definitely something I learned. I wish Emily was here because that was something I learned a lot from Emily. I think sometimes, especially if you're doing a lot of content and a lot of social media and a lot of outreach, you sometimes get into this groove that's very kind of like bland and automatic in a way. And for example, can you all still see my screen share here? This was a post that Emily did talking about self-care. And I actually remember we were having this conversation. She goes, today I'm going home and I'm whatever it is that you put on your face, and she goes, I'm going to relax with some music and my friend's going to come over. And it was one of those things where when she shared it, I was like, oh, and these types of pictures are the ones that we get a lot of interaction with across our platforms, and the ones that seem to resonate with people, the ones that to me seem like, I'm like, oh, okay. But they actually speak to people and connect with them, and especially if you're connecting with youth, youth, they want genuine connections, and they kind of can smell when those connections aren't genuine, or when you're just kind of like feeding them, something that is bland. And I found now that approach is much more time consuming. I will say that, but it also is much more effective in creating connections, and then bringing people in to hear the messages that we're offering about substance. Because I think a lot of the substance use prevention conversations have to be built on trust and some variation of a relationship between our organizations and the people that we're trying to contact with, if that makes sense. So that's something I've learned, and I'm working on to be more authentic in the content that I create around substance use prevention. So I hope that helps as well.
I like that you mentioned that, Dion. Having some history in working with adolescents, that's definitely very true, in the sense that, whether they're 15, whether they're 18, they're young adults, there's always going to be this exchange of trust, right? So they're not just going to take the information that you give them and take it just as, at face value most of the time. They want to know that you're trustworthy, but they also want to know that you trust them and that you are interested in knowing what they're feeling and what they want, what their desires are, and what their needs are, right? Not just, being told what to do. And that, as a parent, it has been very much in the forefront for me, being a mom of a 17-year-old and an 18-year-old. You have to consider these things, right? They do have their own opinions. They do have their own needs and desires. One of the things that I thought was really awesome when I was at DePaul University, I'm actually now seeing it at Adler University, which is a graduate school, is that they hosted something called the coffee hour. And the coffee hour not only provided workshops and kind of mental health support, but it also provided and kind of checked in with youth and said, hey, what's going on? What are you feeling? What are some of the things that you're going through during this pandemic, especially at the very beginning? We wanted to touch base with students as part of the outreach program with the University Counseling Services to kind of, one, let them know we were still available, right? And say, hey, this is how our services have changed. We're still here for you. We want you to reach out if you need support. Letting them know that, hey, cut yourself some slack. We're living in times that we've never experienced before, and navigating them are not going to be clear cut and dry, right? And then also kind of checking in and getting a pulse of what's going on in the community, whether it's, at DePaul or at, Adler. It's just kind of checking in and saying, hey, what are we missing? What are we not doing that's, supportive of you? How do we connect with you if you're not connecting with us? How do we get to you, right? And also, what are some of the things that we're not providing that you are, or that you're currently needing? Mental health was a big one. A lot of students DePaul hosts a lot of international students, and this pandemic definitely affected them in a variety of ways, not just students who were on campus and living in dorms that are, from the US, but also international students who, are from a completely different country, are coming to stay here in dorms and have no other support here in the US. We're now feeling very much abandoned and displaced, right, because of all the immediate changes. So making sure that we were reaching out and saying, hey, we're still here. Being clear and concise and as simple as possible about the information we were putting out there was also very important, because if you notice during the pandemic, everybody was kind of throwing information out there and kind of scrambling to say, to get as much information, to know as much as possible, but it was information overload all at the same time. So we definitely keep it in mind of what we're doing to hear students, hear youth, hear our young adults, because that's actually going to, in return, affect their mental health and also anything that correlates to their behaviors.
Thank you so much for that. I appreciate that. That's why Genoveva is here, because she is amazing at what she does. One last thing I wanted to cover, not cover, just mention, is that, so I'm sorry, can you guys see my screen? Okay, I know the WebEx can sometimes get a little weird. So we don't have one thing that's always interested me and kind of made me crazy at the same time is that we don't have thousands of followers on our social media. However, our social media gets a lot of shares and a lot of reach and impressions. We get a lot of engagement in the content that we do, even though it's not with like tons of people. And one of the things that I've learned is very helpful in amplifying our message is that we work really closely with other organizations, and we definitely work very hard to share each other's information. And in doing that, even though we don't have thousands of followers, some of the organizations, as we amplify our message across social media, in the various things we do, it definitely helps. And that's one amazing method to get to amplify the message, because we're all working towards the same goal, and also to get each of the organizations as individuals name out there as well. So if you don't have organizations that you either kind of partner with via electronic means, or that kind of over time you build a relationship with, where you like kind of know like, oh, if I like this and I kind of like tag them on this, they'll share it and I do the same for them. That's definitely something to develop, because it's been amazingly helpful for us in the long run with just kind of building up the engagement of our posts and everything as that. And so generally speaking, we normally, as far as impressions, engagement go, we usually do somewhere around 20,000 a month, somewhere between 20 and 14, which is, I mean, it's not earth shattering, but for a very small organization with 7 employees, I'm very happy with. And so I definitely wanted to kind of point that out there as well. So were there any additional, I know we're getting close to the witching hour. Were there any additional questions or anything specifically that anyone would like discussed?
I have a question. So how did you know to, because for an organization that might be new to social media, how do you interpret the analytics? How do you, get to know this jargon of impressions and shares and likes are better than shares, or shares are better than likes? How do you get to know that language?
That's a good question. So it's interesting. I technically have no formal background in any of the work that I do. I was a public school teacher, and before that, I was in the Army. And so, but I built my knowledge of social media in the classroom. I was very fortunate to work for a school district in Alaska that was weighed very heavily on social media. And just over time, I will say that, and this is one of those things that you're going to say, no, it has to be more complicated than that. Anything I've ever wondered about, like I'm like, oh, what should I be looking at? What's important? I use a lot of YouTube. And I know that probably sounds very silly, but it's very honest. Like I'm like, oh, a perfect example is SEO. I'm like, everyone talks about it and you always hear about it. I'm like, oh, what's SEO? And sure enough, there's 100 YouTube videos. I have people like I definitely look towards. Like I'm one of those people, I'm very engaged in social media. I do enjoy it. Names like Sean Cannell, Stephen Olsher, like these are people who post videos. They're very respected. They're very well known, and so they're very reputable. So you can trust the information, much like any other avenue of information you're going to find, on the internet. You have to be careful of what you're getting into. So I have my sources that I trust. And then from there, I've just slowly built my base. I've taken classes, I've taken webinars. Yeah, I've even paid for some social media webinar classes, so that I just kind of had a stronger base of knowledge to function with. And so the more you do it, just the more comfortable it becomes. And then when it comes to analytics, I have friends who do social media as well, and so just asking them questions and watching videos and reading. So basically the same thing. There are lots of avenues for information on that back end of things that you can find, if that helps.
Yeah. And for attendees that weren't sure what SEO meant, I put that in the chat. Search engine optimization. For me, some of what I've learned, the city of Chicago, their business, I forget the name of the department, but it's the department that handles and assists businesses with their licenses, etc. They have virtual workshops. I think it's Business Affairs and Consumer Protection, BACP. But they have workshops and webinars that are free, and there's also Google. They have training that they offer for free as well. So sometimes, like you said, once you get on YouTube, you can pretty much find everything that you might need.
Yes. And also just one other thing, especially if you're new to social media and you're building your skills, do your best to learn kind of some of the back end stuff that'll help you. For example, if you use Twitter and you don't use lists, I feel like you're making the job way harder for yourself. If you're not familiar with lists are on Twitter, just really simply, I'm going to see if I can pull it up. I know the screen share has been going in and out a little bit, but just to show you very quickly, let me see. Can you see my screen at this moment?
Yes.
Okay. So if you go to lists, basically right here, you can have lists of people that fit under specific categories, and you add those to those lists. So for example, when I want to see alcohol specific organizations, sub C initially was alcohol only, although we've now expanded to other substances. But if you want to click and see people in that category, you can. If I want to see the people on my list who are in Chicago and only Chicago posts, I can do that. Similar to hashtags, but it's chronicling profiles instead of the specific hashtag. And then from there, you can kind of go, and it just makes it really easy, especially if you're what I call content mining. So content mining is basically just someone posts something that's great, and I'm going to retweet it, and I'm, retweet, attribute, and that might be my post for the day or my post for the morning, and I do an evening post later that's I spend more time on. So once you learn like some of those tricks, it makes it way easier for you.
Yes, definitely. And it can also be a way to get content without creating everything yourself. Yeah.
Which is, I'm sorry.
Because one of the things that I do for the Liquor Control Commission is when especially with the shelter in place and the various risk additional mitigations that different regions are under, sometimes it's hard to just get it out to send an email. And so with Twitter, I'm able, because if the governor says it, then that's what it is. So I can go to the governor's website and keep up. And as soon as he says something, retweet that, and I can get it out much faster than, getting an email out to people. Because as you mentioned, the shares and others that are looking at that particular person as well.
Oh, absolutely. Now that it's only me, I don't have a youth consultant directly working with me on the PACT platforms anymore. I basically manage eight different social media accounts, and so anything I can do to save time is a huge thing. And social media is very time consuming. When you're trying to create content and you're trying to brand it and all those things. So anything I can do to save time is perfect. Yes, that's huge.
Dion, can you talk a little bit more? Because I love the way that you do this. He kind of taught me how to engage via social media, how to like, how to respond to people, add people. It's a lot, like he said. But one thing he has also going for himself is a content calendar. I really, really do like that. So can you kind of talk a little bit more about that and how it kind of grew our followers as well by doing that?
Yes. A key. So if you're not familiar with a content calendar, and then Andrea, I did see your question in the chat box, so I'll answer that right after this. If you're not familiar with a content calendar, it's just basically, or some people refer to it as editorial calendar. It's just a schedule of ideally posts. Like social media, very much. It moves so fast now, but you want to have some sense of consistency so that, whether it's once a day, once every other day, if there are people who like begin to notice your posts and look at your posts and enjoy your posts, you want to kind of give them, a way that they can kind of regularly like, oh, because whether it's conscious or subconscious, they start to notice that every Wednesday they see a blog post from you. Every Wednesday they get your newsletter, whatever the case may be. So when I joined the organization, I created a very basic content calendar. I think initially we were just doing 8 posts a week across the 3 platforms, which is relatively modest. I've seen content calendars where some organizations post 20 times a week. It just kind of depends on what you're posting, the frequency you want to post. And one thing we did do during COVID was we made sure not to over saturate people because there was so much information coming at us. So the content calendar is one thing we did. And I think people disagree on this. I'm a firm believer that the best way to build your following on your social media platforms is through engagement. So engagement is whether you're liking, best way is to actually comment, but it's very time consuming. But I do this sometimes. I may spend a week where I'm like, every day I'm going to be sure to comment, actually type on 3 different posts a day. And I find that people follow you so much faster. It's a great way to build your following. And then just the likes, the engagement, the retweeting, all of that is engagement. But if you're familiar with public narrative, I went to a class of theirs, perfect example about building my social media knowledge. I've gone to multiple classes of theirs on social media. And one thing they've always said is that true engagement is doing all 3 of those things. So you like, you comment, and then you retweet, if it's appropriate to do so. And you'll find that your engagement builds your following dramatically faster than it would happen without that engagement. So that's something we try to do, but kind of going back to the great imperative, is very time consuming. So it's not something that we get to do all the time, unfortunately. Oh, if that helps. And also, Andrea, the one thing is, it's really, when we started our I Got This campaign, that was one of the questions, right? How do you quantify the effects of the campaign as a whole? And it's one of those things, and I've actually sat with our our medical director, Dr. Karen Sheehan. And so she kind of helped put it in perspective for him. She goes, it's one of those things that is very hard it's hard to put numbers to. You can look at how many people actually see the information. You can see the numbers of people that engage the information. Now, being able to put a number as to how many of those did not have a drink on the weekend because of all that information, that's something we've not been able to do. And so for us, we try to gauge the interaction that we can get from youth specifically. And actually, our campaign was focused on youth and adults. So things like people going to visit the tips on having conversations about substance use prevention, that to us was a really good thing. If people are actually looking for those tips, hopefully to have those conversations, we kind of weighed that very heavily, versus just someone retweeting our information and so on and so forth. So I hope that provides a little insight. The answer is we don't necessarily have that data beyond the analytics of the information itself via just the means, how many posters we handed out to people at festivals, things like that. But we don't really have data beyond that step.
Dion, can I just pop in and just kind of say that our communications campaign actually, it was a strength-based campaign. So our messaging, was based on positive messaging. So out of those positive messages, how many young people saw those positive messages? We were very strategic about where we placed those ads throughout the city of Chicago, with I think the red line being the most young people taking that line. Dion, if I'm right, was it the red line? Yeah. So, and I think we got millions of impressions with that. So it was more so of a strength-based communications campaign.
Yeah, according to the organization that we worked with on especially the physical, the estimated impressions, like in person, were close to 1 million, and then our separate online impressions over the 3 years were over 1 million as well. So I mean, and those are great numbers, and you love to be able to tell funders those numbers, absolutely. But yeah, it's hard to go ahead and put numbers beyond that data. So yes, I hope that provides some insight, Andrea. All right. Are there any other questions?
My name's Mary. I just wanted to make a comment. I actually emailed Linda, and thank you so much for the information in the chats. I wrote down some of these websites. We're just starting a youth drop-in center in Roselle, and so it's been very bad timing to open in January and shut down in March, and it's kind of hard. So I'm definitely going to try to get some of your expertise.
Mary, please don't hesitate to reach out to us. We love helping other organizations, because what I find is, any help we can provide helps us to reflect on what we're doing. Because if we were to pivot this conversation and talk about the 100 things I've done wrong over the last 6 months, I could have just as long a conversation about that. I did this, I posted this, I shouldn't have posted that, I didn't post this, all the different things you can do wrong, or not wrong, but just I wish I had done other things. So it helps us to reflect on what we're doing as well, and make sure that we're being most effective for the youth that we engage as well. And so it's a great opportunity for both of us. So please don't hesitate to reach out. And there's some things we didn't.
Linda mistakenly gave me her email address, so now I got it.
And she can give you mine as well.
Okay.
And there's some things I didn't get to touch base on. Since COVID started, we also started a newsletter. So the newsletter is actually for our coalition, but you could also start a newsletter for youth as well. If that was something you were interested in doing to kind of extend your reach and engage in a different way. And there's other things. One thing I've learned as well, I'm not a big user of, but TikTok is just taking the world over. The most engaged content we've ever had in the 2 years I've been with the Sub-C was a TikTok post, also created by Emily, and it got somewhere in the neighborhood of 30,000 clicks on it, and I mean just numbers that are just ridiculous. And it was a very simple post. And so there are tons of ways and methods to engage for your demographic and for your the youth that you're trying to engage, for sure. So anything we can do to help, we are definitely here for.
Thank you so much.
Of course. Any other questions? And also, please, I put in the box, if you are doing content creation, please check out Canva. It's funny, the youth asked me, are you sponsored? Do you sponsor by them? I'm like, no, I just use it all day, every day to create content. And it's so easy that I just tell everyone about it because it makes my job dramatically easier. So definitely check that website out as well. And if you need any other references or resources, please don't hesitate to email me. I can send you I have a list already made up of probably about 10 that I can send you from everything from music to video to art to photos that are all copyright free, and then putting it all together in a content creator like Canva.
Thank you so much. Linda just shared with everybody your email address, so we'll all be emailing you.
Oh, absolutely. Not a problem. So I think we've reached a witching hour. Michelle, if there's anything else additionally.
No, I agree with Canva. What I like about Canva is, because I've used it as well, is you don't have to be a graphic designer. So I know like some people, they're very great with Photoshop or Illustrator or any other type of graphic design type tool, but I'm like Arial Times New Roman type of girl. So Canva's definitely helped me out as far as posts and just making it aesthetically pleasing. So.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So what I'll do is we'll have a break between now. Our last session will be at 11, and no more breakout sessions. And that one is on COVID and checking IDs in light of COVID. So you definitely want to grab lunch, or assuming you just have to go to your kitchen, grab lunch or a snack, and then come back for 11. You can stay logged on, and if you do log out, then it's the same link. So there isn't a separate link for the 11 o'clock session.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And thank you so much, everyone. I hope the information was useful. And please enjoy the rest of the afternoon.
All right. Thank you, Dion.
All right. Well, hello, everyone. I'm very happy to be here, and I thank you for having me. My name is Susan Dworak. I'm a fake ID expert, and I'm also the CEO of Real Identities. This is how you can get in touch with me. I'll give you this information at the end of the presentation as well. It's as simple as info@id.training. And my goal today is to explain all of the new real IDs that are out there, and also their corresponding fake IDs, and how underage drinkers and folks are scamming online systems during the COVID pandemic and what we can do to prevent it. So what I'd like to do is save the questions for the end. If you could just jot them down, and I'll leave plenty of time at the end for questions. And of course, you can always reach out to me. So let's go ahead and get started. In order to understand IDs, we have to first start with a trajectory of IDs. So this roadmap shows you where we are in the United States with IDs. 90% of us carry the little plastic driver license. But we're also seeing new digital IDs, including, going along the road, the mobile ID, or MDL, which is a mobile driver license. It's literally just an image of a driver license on a cell phone. And I'm going to talk about each of these individually as we go along, but I want to mention them now so you see where we're going along this trajectory. The next is biometrics. Just as the name suggests, it's biology, which is any part of the body, metrics that is measured. Today we're going to talk about fingerprints. And last but not least, blockchain, which is a technology that is being used for many different things. I'll explain blockchain, and I'll tell you exactly how it's being used for identity purposes and purchasing fake IDs and ordering alcohol and other regulated product online. So bear with me. My slides are not forwarding here. Great. I'm going to do it manually. There we go. So a lot of people will say, what's the big deal about fake IDs? Because the low-hanging fruit there is alcohol and teenagers getting a hold of alcohol. But teenagers, I do mean underage drinkers. I know some of them are 20 years old at this point. But the reality is that fake IDs cause a lot of problems around the world. In the United States, for example, the Las Vegas shooter checked into the hotel with a fake ID. The Oklahoma City bomber rented that truck that he loaded with explosive and parked next to a daycare with a fake ID. A lot of different very nefarious crimes, particularly human trafficking, wild animal trade, et cetera. That all happens with fake IDs. And the big one that we're going to talk about today is 9/11. The terrorists took down the Twin Towers in New York and also the Pentagon, part of the Pentagon, using fake IDs. And they're very, very easy to get. They're very, very easy to make. So let's talk about fake IDs. But as a preface, before I jump into real IDs and fake IDs, I want to tell you how important 9/11 was to the United States. What happened was a group of terrorists had nearly 40 fake IDs between them, and they used those and some of them were real IDs issued by DMVs that they scammed. They scammed the DMV to get those IDs. Some of them were fake IDs, and they rented apartments with them. They took flight lessons with them. They took test flights with them. They took those, very unfortunately, the 9/11 flights with them. And when the federal government found out what happened, they said, okay, wait, this is a mess. We need to clean up our identification in the United States. We need one ID per person. And that's when they created the Real ID Act. And so sometimes when we talk about real IDs, we talk about lowercase r, it's a real ID versus a fake ID, or a capital R, Real ID Act compliant ID. And there's a difference there. But the reason that came about is 9/11. I'm going to show you the differences here. So where did all these stars come from? The federal government, when it enacted the Real ID Act, said, okay, these IDs are too easy to forge. We need to have certain rules for these IDs. For example, no more of this nonsense where one person can have 10 IDs from 10 different states, or one person can use multiple nicknames. My name is Susan Fenimore Dvorak. I could be S, I could be Sue, I could be Susie. No more of that nonsense. You've got to bring in your birth certificate and you've got to use your real full name. And then they talked about security features. You have to have certain security features on the IDs so that they're harder to replicate. But let me tell you, they're super easy to replicate. I can do it in minutes. So do forgers, even college students. We'll get to that because they do make mistakes, and that's the important part of this presentation. But the federal government said, okay, once your ID complies, that is your state ID complies with all of these parameters, then you put a gold star on it. And some of the states said, okay, other states said, nope. Federal government said, why? And they said, well, if you're not going to pay for it, we're not going to do it. And we can put a gold star in the top right-hand corner of our ID because that's where we have our hologram. And the state said, okay, we'll put the gold star in the bottom right-hand corner. Some states, okay. Other states said okay. Some said, nope, can't do that because that's where we have our signatures or our ghost photo. And the federal government said, well, for heaven's sake, just put the gold star somewhere on the ID. Some states said yes. Other states said, nope, we can't print with gold. To retrofit our printers for gold ink, it cost us millions, and we're just not going to pay that. And they said, okay, use a black star. Some states said, okay. Other states said, nope. We already have black stars on our ID, and if we put a black star, you won't be able to see it. And they said, okay, well then invert it, put it inside of a circle. And the federal government was just saying, for heaven's sake, put the star somewhere. And in my crazy state, in California, they said, all right, that's great. How about if we put it in the butt of a bear? And they said, okay, go ahead. And then Maine came along. So we're seeing all these different variations of ID. My point in showing you these is that the Real ID Act created a lot of standards and had a lot of successes when it comes to real IDs versus fake IDs. But for the people who check ID, for the people who are trying to get training and recognize IDs, it exponentially increased the number of IDs that see. For example, take a look at these Georgia IDs. What's real? What's not real? Is it a gold star? Is it a black star? Is it a little peach? Is it a big peach? Are they both real? Is one fake? How would you know unless someone showed you? The answer is both of these are real. In Georgia, they happened to shift gears. They printed one issuance with gold and then one issuance with black. Okay, but now let's look at another state as an example. So I'm setting the stage here for just how difficult it is to recognize IDs. Look at these Iowa IDs. Which ones of those are still in circulation? Which of those are real IDs? Top two, right? Because they have the Real ID star. But wait, what about, is that a real ID? The answer is yes. That is a real ID. This happens to be a real identification card, lowercase r. It's just not a Real ID compliant ID. It doesn't have the gold star. You don't have to have a capital R Real ID compliant ID in the United States for your ID to be valid. You simply need it for federal purposes to travel, TSA, federal airspace, or to enter a federal building. Otherwise, with a star, without a star, both of them may be perfectly valid. this one. This happens to be a Real ID Act compliant. Here's the thing though, forgers make mistakes with these Real ID stars all the time. And if somebody shows you outlined in green, that's real, outlined in red, like stop, that's fake. If on this Iowa ID, that Real ID star overlaps the seal, it's fake. A lot of forgers are doing that. So if somebody shows you that, you can instantly tell the difference between a real ID and a fake ID. Now, the problem is this isn't contained in a book. The trainings that I know of nationwide are not talking about this, and this is definitely not going to be caught by a scanner. Nor is this. Same ID, tactile features, flat features. A lot of forgers are making these flat. Would you be able to recognize that? How do you know? Forgers do get things right, like the state name. Somebody's got to be able to show you what's real and what's fake, because workers need help in the United States. How can we reasonably make an assessment of any ID in the US when there are over 800 valid versions of identification in the United States? Let me say that again. In the 50 states, DC, and the territories, there are over 800 valid versions and variations of ID in the United States. There's no way you can memorize them from a training. So I absolutely agree, and I agree with Michelle. That was a perfect segue into my presentation. The current methods for checking ID in the United States, which are scanners, books, and trainings, they're not working, because if you and I go to a training, whether it's online or in person for 2 hours or 4 hours, they spend a grand total of about 10 minutes on IDs. There's no way they can tell you the things that I just showed you. There's no way they can present that to you. People need to have regular access to clear, current, and correct IDs. So that's where I come in as a fake ID expert and as the CEO. We are a social responsibility company. We're here to help people check ID, particularly in the COVID pandemic. So we've got all kinds of free resources. If you go to www.id.training, and it's literally www.id.training, click on COVID, you will see a video and instructions and a printable template that anybody can use. It's absolutely free for contactless ID checking. How are we going to check IDs during the pandemic when we can't touch them? And also masked ID checking. It's a great resource for you to share with your communities, however you may want to do that. Email it, post it on social media, contact me, I can help you with it. But the point is, we need to get this information to people to teach fake IDs. Now, one of the big things that's happening with COVID is that DMVs are allowed, some DMVs, not all, some states are allowing extensions on expirations. And this is becoming a problem because we're seeing people get duplicate IDs and sharing expired IDs. How do you know if it's, what's real, what's fake? Well, you'll see on our resources, we have a list of every state and DC and territory of the DMV. You can go right to the DMV site, or you can click on that COVID link and it will tell you instantly how long that ID is valid after the extension period. So we're trying to do what we can to help people during. Now, here's the trouble people are having with scanners. There's no such thing as a high-tech scanner. What is a scanner scanning? For the most part, they're scanning barcodes or magnetic stripes. So barcodes and magnetic stripes are over half a century old. They're not high tech. I can go to any number, and I mean hundreds of websites, and plug in information, and it will spit out a barcode, either the linear stripe barcode or that, I'll show you in a second, the square PDF 417 is what they call it, barcode with all the little squares on it. There's no magic to it. And within minutes, and this is what's most frightening, I could go online, I could find your real driver license number and address. All of this information is available online. I plug that information into create a barcode, and guess what? It creates a barcode. Either one of the linear, which is a stripe, or the rectangular PDF 417. That is going to fly right through a scanner. And even if it pings the database is going to say, yep, there's a Susan in California with that driver license number. Super easy. Now, what a lot of teenagers are doing is going to places that use scanners that use the magnetic stripe for scanning. So that magnetic stripe there's no magic to it. There's high co, meaning coercivity, low co. There's no magic to a magnetic stripe. It's the same stripe that's on a credit card. It's the same stripe that, for example, is on a hotel room key. Have you ever checked into a hotel? They don't give you the keys anymore. They give you that credit card. You're tired, you get to the hotel, you walk down the hall with your luggage, you get to the door, you're tapping or dipping your card and it's not working. So you gotta trudge back down to the lobby and they say, oh, sure. The clerk takes it from you and goes, taps on something, hands it right back to you. That's exactly how IDs are changed with. So for $20 or so, you can go to Amazon.com, you can buy a reencoder, you take the ID, slide it through it, it says you were born in 1999, you backspace over the 9, you change it to a 7, you slide that ID through it again, now it's your ID with your photo, your name, your address. It is literally a real ID, but it is scanning with a different birth date. And the problem is a lot of people who are checking IDs using these scanners are not really looking at the human being and checking the ID to make sure that it actually is a real ID. So you may have this other scanner. This is called an OCR, optical character recognition. And a lot of these scanners, by the way, will tell you, you know, our proprietary algorithm will validate and verify authenticity. And what a load. It's doing nothing of the sort. How can a device validate and authenticate an ID? It can't. These OCR scanners, just like the other scanners, it's optical. It's got a little camera in it, a little lens, and it's looking for fonts or patterns, something in the right place. The fake ID manufacturers have this down. Every template for every ID in the United States is available, down to the right font, the right size, the right color, the right placement. So scanners aren't going to work. So what are you going to do with scanners? One of the things I encourage you to do is 2 Google searches or whatever search engine you use, Bing, Google, whatever it is. Search fake ID, and you will see the number 1 word that comes up for all of those is fake ID, scannable, scannable, scannable. They're all scannable, right? Then I want you to search ID scanner. Pick any one of them. Go right past what I call the shiny happy marketing and go down to the bottom of the page where they have terms and conditions and just look for the word disclaimers, because it's typically written in very plain English. But what it will tell you is, yeah, our hardware, it's got some serious vulnerabilities. And our software that goes with the hardware, it's got some serious vulnerabilities. And if anything goes wrong, like hacking, identity theft, which we know is rampant, Interpol just said it's up, what, 170% with COVID? If anything goes wrong, we're only liable for the $3.99 that you paid for our app to scan an ID. Or we're only liable for what you paid for this device, this scanner. But those disclaimers are written in plain English. Please go to those and take a look at those, because that's important to know. It's frustrating to me as a fake ID expert to see jurisdictions, whether it's states or cities or someone else mandating the use of scanners, because they don't work, and we're really setting people up for failure. Right? So you've got to go beyond this, because what's going to happen is if a worker is called in front of a judge for an underage service violation, and that worker says, hey, my city mandates the use of ID scanners, and my company requires the use of scanners, you know what the judge is going to say? I don't care. Because section blah, blah, blah of the state code requires that you properly and thoroughly check an ID. And taking a little piece of plastic and sliding it through a slot or zapping it with a cell phone or some kind of scanner is in no way properly or thoroughly checking ID. You must do due diligence. So we've got a patchwork of legislation, as we know, throughout the United States. We have a patchwork of legislation and rules and regulations and requirements and whatnot in each state, Illinois as well. But no matter what, 100% of our jurisdictions require due diligence. People need to be trained to properly and thoroughly check ID, and they need access to the right IDs. What's happening with scanners? The problem is that the scanner cannot confirm that the data on the ID is real, right? Super easy to get real data, super easy to create 50-year-old technology, and it's put on an ID, and all that information is transferred over Wi-Fi, and that's really vulnerable. So where is it going? Everywhere. It's going all over the world, and it's capturing personally identifiable information, which is setting people up for really serious problems. It's setting the ID holder up for identity theft and other, and it's setting the worker up for, and it's his or her company as well, privacy law violations. And those fines, by the way, can be absolutely crushing. Now, a while back, our federal government did a test, and they put hundreds of IDs online, fake IDs. They created fake names, fake, persons, put them up online, and within 10 minutes, there were over 1,200 attempts from 28 countries. People want our data. Scanning of IDs, people know where to get it. That's why you heard that Home Depot was hacked, Target was hacked, these larger companies, Experian, unfortunately recently Drizzly, because the people who are sitting at home during the pandemic, again, it's not that this didn't happen before, it certainly did. Cybercrime certainly occurred, but they're looking for information, and scanners are a great way to get it. So now where does that data go? When you and I do a Google search or any kind of other search, we're really getting what we see in this iceberg picture, maybe like 10 or 15% of what is on the internet. Everything else, 85 to 90% of what is online is actually under the surface line in the deep and the dark web. It doesn't mean it's illegal. It just means that it's private. So your agency, your university, your police department, whatever it may be, that information is under the surface line so that people can't see it. But the problem is a lot of the problem is that it can't be seen, it can be hidden. So a lot of this does happen, below the surface line where law enforcement cannot see it. This is where fake IDs are bought. All right, I'm going to talk about that in a little bit, but I want to go on along following that roadmap a little bit more on the trajectory of IDs. What you're seeing here are mobile driver licenses. Now, they're currently being tested by multiple states. They're in use by 3 states, Oklahoma, Colorado, and Louisiana. All 3 of those states have different rules, and they're very, very easy to forge. So here's the situation. We know that there's 2 kinds of phones, right? Conventional and smart. Conventional are your phones that are plugged into your office wall or your home wall. You dial a number, you reach somebody. A smartphone, like your cell phone, has an operating system in it, or an OS. That operating system is what allows your phone to act like a computer so that you can send messages and access the internet and do whatever you want to do on your phone, right? There's 2 kinds of operating systems, iOS, which is Apple, and Android, which is Google. That's it. There's 2 operating systems for cell phones. So you either have an Apple phone or Google phone, iOS or Android. These mobile driver licenses operate very differently on iOS and Android. So for example, iOS Apple, you can very easily screenshot one of these and text it to a friend or email it. And once they get it, it takes literally a matter of seconds of replacing the photo and the text on these IDs. And it's important that the workers know that these, in most cases, cannot be accepted for the for the sale of regulated products, sale or service of regulated product. That most of the time, but not always, people are required to still carry their ID card to back these up. The next form of identification, biodata, we're going to talk about fingerprints. So fingerprint recognition is nothing more than pattern recognition. It's really just loops and arches and lines. And when a machine is reading a fingerprint, it's just looking for the differentiation of it. Being in law enforcement, some of you know that it's very, very easy to capture a fingerprint. You can do it with tape, you can do it with powder, you can do it with glue, you can do it with gel. In fact, the same gel that you use to make gummy bears, you can capture a fingerprint. And when you grab somebody's cell phone, what's all over that cell phone? Their fingerprints. Super easy to lift it, flip the phone over, and use that fingerprint pad to open that person's phone. And then you now have access to their banking apps, their alcohol sale apps, whatever you need. Another thing, if you're interested in Googling it, search the Apple fingerprint spoof. The fingerprint identification on the new smartphones, on the iOS Apple phones that came out, was spoofed within 48 hours of it coming out. This is really easy technology to spoof. Now, last but not least, we have this technology called blockchain. A lot of people have heard about blockchain. It can become very, very complicated and technical, but it's really not. Just as the name implies, blockchain is blocks of information chained together. But what is interesting is, see how little circles around the center here? Those little circles are the blocks, not that center. With blockchain, there's no central authority. So blockchain is what they call DLT, distributed ledger technology. Let me explain that using an example. If you go to a bank, the bank has a ledger, and there's one ledger by that bank. No matter the branch, no matter where they are around the world, it's one ledger. And it has your name, your account number, and how much you have in your account. With blockchain, that ledger is distributed between the parties in the chain. So there's no central authority like a DMV issuing a driver license. There's no government agency. It's basically a form of self-identification. The last thing I want to mention about blockchain is you may have heard the term immutable, meaning unchangeable, related to blockchain. Once that data in those blocks is locked, it can never be changed. It's immutable. So if I identify myself on the blockchain as Mary Jones and not Susan Dvorak, and it's immutable, how do we know? And there's no government authority in the middle. There's no central authority determining who I am. It's just the other parties in the chain, like the people who are giving me fake IDs, like the people who are selling regulated product. So blockchain, again, it can get very, very complicated. It's used for a lot of really, really good reasons, but it is being used by bad actors to sell fake IDs and regulated product. So now, let's get down to the practical application. Now you have to buy your fake ID and you have to order alcohol, but you don't want anybody to know that you're doing it. How do you do it? You can create what they call a VPN, which is a virtual private network. You can do it on your own laptop, your own computer. You can do it on your own network at home. You simply have to open an incognito window or open a private window, and it automatically creates a VPN, a virtual private network. And what that does is it hides the IP address. So the IP address is Internet Protocol. Every device that can access the internet has an IP. Your cell phone, your laptop, your Ring doorbell, if it can access the internet, it has an IP. But the VPN is masking all of that, allowing you to operate with anonymity. So it's masking your device. They can't see what cell phone or laptop it came from. It's masking your internet connection. It can't see where you're located. So this is what people use to go onto the internet to buy these products. All right, so now that you're hidden, you need to create an identity. I just chose this as one representative example. You can identify yourself as yourself, and very unfortunately, this is happening all too often with teenagers. The teenagers are giving up their own images, their real name, their real address, etc. It can be very dangerous. But what some people are doing is using a technology like this one. This is GANs. This happens to, I don't want to over-explain this and get too far into the weeds, but it's a technology that uses something called discriminators, where it will take 3 different photos, as you see here, find common denominators, use discriminators, and look at that. Look at that large picture on the right of your screen. That looks like a real human being. She doesn't even exist. There is no such human being, but it may be close enough to the person holding the ID. So at any rate, kids are using all kinds of tricks, not only kids, but nefarious actors, as we saw from the tiles before, but people are using all kinds of tricks to create false identities. So you create an identity and then you log on. Nobody's really confirming that it's you. And you can log on as Captain Carrot, Mary Jones, whoever you want to be. Nobody's really checking this, right? So you've created your photo, uploaded it, you've created your identity. Now you need to buy something, you're going to make a payment. Typically when we make payments, we use credit cards. But online, you're not going to use a physical credit card. You're going to use one of 2 things. You're going to use a one-time, or what they call burner. A physical credit card, by the way, can be a burner credit card. Those are the ones you buy at, the grocery store, the drugstore. It's kind of a one-time use credit card, doesn't have your name on it. Those can be burner credit cards, but you can also get one online. You literally just get the 16-digit number and use it as a credit card, or you can use something called cryptocurrency or cybercurrency. Those 2 terms are absolutely synonymous. Cryptocurrency, cybercurrency. And you can see here, I've added, I think 20 little tiles here. The most popular of which is at the top in that circle, the B as in boy. That's for Bitcoin. It's got the little $ line. So Bitcoin is the most popular kind of cyber currency. It's one of thousands. People are creating their own cryptocurrencies. You can create your own cryptocurrency. It's just a method of payment. It's a digital method of payment between people that people decide to accept. Now, this is where this ties into blockchain. Cyber currency operates on the blockchain. So you need the blockchain to pay with cyber currency. Okay? All right. So moving along, let's talk about how delivery happens. But I want to emphasize something here. Delivery can happen safely. And during the COVID pandemic, we've got to keep these people in business, right? We've got to keep folks in business. And we can do that if ultimately the person handing the product to the other person confirms age and identity. So I want to confirm that. Ultimately, when it comes to alcohol or any other physical product, one person is handing another person a product. They've got to make sure that that person is of age. So far, everything that I've talked about is digital, right? But there is a physical component to it, and that's when the ID checking has to happen. So let's talk about how the online process happens before we actually get to the physical delivery. So here we have our average American teenager, maybe, in the bedroom working on multiple monitors, right? Multiple monitors in front, monitor in the hand, which is the cell phone, maybe in mom and dad's basement. But when you go online and you can do a Google search for any alcohol delivery, you will get hundreds of replies for websites or apps. Apps is short for applications. Applications can be used on a phone, and they can be used on a laptop, and they can be hidden. Your applications don't have to appear as little icons on your phone. Those can be hidden. But you go to any one of those that you want to use, and you're asked to identify yourself. Typically in two ways. One, they ask you to upload a selfie, and then they ask you to upload an ID. Let me say that again. You go online with your VPN, so you're operating totally anonymously, and you're asked to upload your own selfie and your own ID. It's basically self-identification. And often the same selfie that was used on the ID is exactly the same, which should not be, right? That should not be, because one should be a DMV photo and one should be a selfie photo taken, I don't know, somewhere in your bedroom or wherever you take your selfie. But the issue with many of these apps, not all, but many, is that if the selfie matches and the ID matches, the order ensues. How is that possible? They're not checking the IDs internally, and that's what they need to do. So teenagers, very unfortunately, are scamming this system at record rates with real IDs and fake IDs, both online and at the time of delivery. Keyword there, at the time of delivery. Okay, so here's one of the biggest takeaways. We can't allow convenience over security. We know what happens when IDs are scanned. The personal data goes with it. This particular scenario that you're seeing in this image is rather frightening to me. A lot of delivery workers are part-time temporary workers, and they're using their personal cell phones on the job to capture personal data. The fact I happen to have two 20-somethings, and the thought of them using delivery and some random person capturing their image, their name, knowing exactly where they live, it terrifies me. I don't want my data in somebody else's personal cell phone. So this is not a great way for us to operate here. So what do we do? What we do is we offer a solution. So we are a social responsibility company, and we created this product. It's available at absolutely no cost. I am not here to sell a product. I am here to help you for free. I am available to you. info@id.training. I will answer any questions that you have. I will help in any way that you have, or any way that you need. We do offer this to government and law enforcement absolutely for free. It's typically $100. It's now down to $10. Don't want to talk about sales. I want to talk about what this app does so that you have that aha moment and you understand the due diligence that this provides. So as a social responsibility company, we're mostly based in Silicon Valley, but we have people all over the country, and we work all over the country, and this is online. No download, no upload. It's literally a website. It operates like an app, but it's a website. And it has all 50 states, those 800 valid versions and variations on all of that information. is here at your fingertips. What happens is, let's say you're checking ID, somebody comes in, they hand you a Delaware ID. So you click on Delaware, and then you click on the ID that looks like the one in your hand. Okay, it looks like that one. And you get clear, current, and correct images of IDs. Overt, which is overt, just that, features that you can see immediately. Covert are features on IDs where you need some kind of special tool. You need a flashlight or a UV light or something to actually check the ID, but you're going to get clear and current images of the ID. You're also going to get dates. This is a quote that I've heard very unfortunately all too often, and I heard this from a CEO of a major brand. Thousands and thousands of locations all over the United States. We don't have time to check ID. Really? You don't have time. You don't have 3 seconds because it's literally tap, tap, tap. This is before they knew about this. This was a couple of years ago when I was asking about ID checking. It's a competitive edge. If we take too long, they're going to go to our big box competitor. Well, all right, let's solve that problem. Let's make it as easy as possible and tell people exactly where they can find the dates. Let's give them during COVID a link where they can click on COVID and see what the extension date is. Let's make this as easy as humanly possible, because those of us, particularly those of us on this call, have to create a better standard. We have to hold people to a better standard. These kids are scamming the system at record rates. They're getting alcohol delivered, and they're jumping on the roof of their house, filming TikTok videos, jumping in people, getting hurt, care. And that's when it's, excuse my cough. Let me get a sip of cough. I want to pause for a moment, apologize for my voice. You might see some haze in the background. I am recording from Silicon Valley, and we are in the middle of the fires from our beaches to Napa to Los Angeles, and we actually have daylight today, which is great, but I am a little scratchy, so I do apologize to everyone for my voice. So I have a test for you. Which of these holograms are real and which are fake? While you're taking a look, I want to let you know that 90% of the people I talk to get this wrong. What's real, what's fake? Now the technical answer is these are all real holograms, because they are holograms. They're all real holograms. The question is though, which is a fake ID? Which is a real ID? Most people say the top right. That's wrong. It's the top left. And this is where we come in as a social responsibility company. People need help. We track the real ID and the fake ID market on a daily basis, and we put IDs into the app, into ID.training, that shows them this. Outlined in green, that's the real one. Outlined in red, those are the most common fakes you're going to see on the market. Right now, in that hologram, Caesar Rodney there in the white shirt and the orange pants, none of the fake holograms have that. That's how you tell the difference. So imagine if you had that for hundreds of IDs, just like I showed you that real ID star. If it's got this on the header, fake. If it's not that, fake. For hundreds and hundreds of IDs, updated on a daily basis. That's due diligence. That's what people need. And they also need training. We have videos in the app. I don't want to get into that, but we do have videos that will help people. I hope if so you can check out, you simply contact me or just go to ID.training, click on get the app, and I'll get the app for you because I want you to see what it does to prevent the use of fake IDs. Because the reality is the human eye is better than any scanner. It will not catch 5 IDs. We've got thousands and thousands of them. The human eye is the best way to catch the use of a fake ID. The other thing is, if someone is old enough to sell and serve alcohol, they've been around people for a long time. They are a teenager, or at some point they were a teenager. It's a very tribal experience. People, and you can tell from their face, from their clothing, from their behavior, from a lot of different other clues, nuances that you can put together. Like, yeah, maybe this person, I don't know. They're either definitely under 21 or they're definitely over, if you're 35 or older, definitely, right? You can tell I'm over 21. But if somebody's along that edge, we've got to give them some kind of resource that they can look at and check. Because the books, those little 5x7 paperback books, those have 1 or 2 IDs in them. They're very blurry, don't have clear overt and covert features in them. They're outdated by the time they go to print. Those are not working for people. Again, the training, you go to a training for 1 or 2 hours, there's no way anybody's going to be able to show you 800 of anything, never mind 800 complex IDs with hundreds of features on each ID, right? And scanners are setting people up to fail because those poor workers are going to get in front of that judge, and that judge is going to say, sorry, X $1,000 fine, misdemeanor for you. You should have done due diligence. You should have known it. And the person is standing there saying, but I did what my jurisdiction told me to do, and I did what my company told me to do. Again, we've got to have a better standard. So getting back to our trajectory here, the biggest takeaway is the due diligence. For all of these, we need due diligence. Right now, 90% of us are using the plastic ID card. All of these other technologies, the MDL, biometrics, blockchain, already in existence. The ID, with 330 million people in the United States, right? And most of them who are adults carry this ID card. Those are going to be around for at least a couple of decades, especially in smaller communities, meaning not in your cosmopolitan cities. But it's important that people be trained on each of these technologies and they have access to the current information so they know what they're allowed to accept and what they're not allowed to. So the key takeaways here, immediately applicable steps: know the technology, know the hardware and the software, go right to those disclaimers. Do not allow convenience over human training. Don't allow sliding of a card, swiping of a card, zapping of a card. We need to train human beings because the key takeaway as underscored here is we cannot remove humans from the ID checking process. And that is where I'm going to end and take questions here. Again, you can get the app for free, info@id.training, or you can go to id.training and just click on get the app. You're going to click on the free government link, and it's going to send a message to our team that says so-and-so is requesting free access. We'll approve your email address. If you have a .gov email address, it's going to go right through. But if you don't, we'll get a message that says this person wants the app for free. We'll ping you, say, hey, was this you? Were you at the Illinois Liquor Control Commission Summit? If so, we'll give you the app for free so you can see what this does. Excuse me again for the cough, but most importantly, I want to ask you to please reach out to me at info@id.training or www.id.training. I'm going to stop the sharing now and come back to me live because I do want for you to ask questions and I want you to share stories. I want so many people reach out to me on a daily basis and collaborate, federal, state, and local law enforcement, private industry, so we can work together to prevent the really serious consequences that are happening with fake IDs. So I want to thank Michelle and Lee and everybody at the commission who had me today. I'm so thankful for this opportunity. Appreciate it very much. And with that, let's open the conversation. Let's talk about fake IDs.
Thank you, Susan. And one of the things that as I was listening to your presentation, I just remember all the videos that Lee has done where he's looking at the ID, he's looking at the person, he's looking at the ID again, and it may seem as though that it's taking a long time, but he's doing, and he's also teaching others that that's what you need to do. You need to do your due diligence when checking IDs and how important it is. So again, I'll leave the floor open to anyone that has any questions. And I think this is a discussion that will continue. I see your point in the chat, Rosa, that and what we'll probably do is have another Bassett kind of town hall where we can have these discussions because I'm not sure if you know, Susan, but we do have requirements for our delivery. So with our the legislation that was enacted, the delivery drivers or the person that's making the delivery does need to be BASSET trained.
Right. Yep.
So that's a great step for Illinois, but we definitely need to continue the discussion as there may be a move to make some of the temporary legislation permanent.
Yep. Yeah, and we're happy to help with the BASSET training and provide content and information. And anybody who's can get the app because again, and you're absolutely right, Michelle. You hit the nail on the head. Those videos are critical. When you look at the ID, look at the person. Look at the ID, look at the person. That's part of that tribal. Like you're part of me, and we're looking at each other. Like, are you really 21? And then the key is looking at the ID, knowing what to look for on the ID. 800 valid versions and variations. Tell them apart. I showed you Delaware, white shirt, orange pants. No other state has that. That's Delaware specific. I showed you the Iowa Real ID star overlapping the state seal. No other state has that. That's Iowa specific. I could go on and on. We track the market on a daily basis, and that's exactly what people need to check IDs. Because we approach this, we're a team of legal and tech experts, and we approached it from a legal perspective to say, why millions and millions and millions of dollars in liability over fake IDs? Why aren't people catching these fake IDs? And then when we looked at the current methods, the book, training, scanners, our team said, these don't work for the following reasons. What people really need is clear, current, and correct IDs. Clear, it's got to be clear. You can't see it in those books. Correct, it has to be correct information, and it has to be current because these change every single day. So it's got to be updated every day, and people need instant access to it. It's got to be really fluid, like using the Delaware example. Tap on Delaware, tap on the ID, boom, 1, 2, 3. It's literally 3 seconds. And one of the things I tell people when they say, we don't have time to check IDs, is it's going to take you a lot longer to defend an underage service violation, weeks and months. And unfortunately, people don't listen to that. They don't figure it out until the kids are jumping off the roof into the pool filming TikTok videos and there's a problem, right?
And that's when they get a letter from Avi in our legal department.
That's exactly. Well, I'd love to hear any fake ID stories that people have or fake ID experience. I love sharing those, collaborating on those bits of information. Online as well today.
Susan, do you have any fake passport cards? Have you run across that where the passport cards from foreign countries and the language that they use is a passport from a foreign national? And I'm wondering, it's not listed as a passport card. And if it's not listed there, is that ID a legal ID to accept or not? It's an interesting aspect. But I've been involved in a lawsuit where the Canadian IDs weren't involved and they were accepted, and because they weren't listed in the statute, it was they automatically lost the case. So the words of the documents and the words that are used specifically by each state have to be really explained.
That's exactly right. And that can be confusing for all these workers because there is a patchwork of legislation, a patchwork of requirements of what IDs you can accept and not accept. And well, if you're questioning the ID, ask for a second form of ID, and that person might have from another state. And by the way, that does happen. Didn't go off on a tangent, but I'll get right back to your question in a second. But a lot of these kids are sharing on social media what online websites and apps accept what IDs and what in-person venue, meaning on-premise service venues, accept what IDs. So they're sharing just word of mouth and also on social media, which we track. That, for example, in Austin, Texas, this bar uses this scanner. So be sure you use and I'm just saying hypothetically, South Carolina, Texas, or Ohio ID if you're going to go to that bar. But if you go to this bar, they're using the other kind of scanner and you need a Virginia, Maryland, or Delaware ID. So a lot of these kids will have multiple IDs so they can be used in different states, and they're sharing them. They may use that GANs, you know, 2 or 3 kids get together and create one image. They look enough like each other and they order the IDs. A lot of fake IDs, as you'll see if you do that Google search for that word scannable, 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 scannable. A lot of these fake ID sites do sell in doubles and triples, so that if an ID is confiscated, the kid can just use another one, but a lot of the kids are sharing those. But in answer to your question, Bob, we do not do passports at this time. We are strictly doing US driver licenses, because that's what most of our people are seeing in our experience. Yeah, but you're absolutely right. It's a patchwork of legislation. It's hard to suss out.
Yeah, it's just interesting where some of the IDs are left out just by the wordage, and then they have to be in. It's like Mexican consulate IDs. Some states include them, some states don't. So it's the wording that's done. The other question I was going to ask is just, if you hold the ID up, it's better to hold it up next to the head so you're matching it right away. You don't break away. You'd agree with that, wouldn't you?
I would agree with that, absolutely. We do have 4 videos in the app. One is how to use the app, one is how to check an ID, one is how to spot a fake, and the 4th is facial recognition. The videos are very, very short. They're 2 to 6 minutes long. That's your due diligence. If you get in front of a judge, and the judge, because for due diligence, the judge is going to ask, have training, and 2, did you check the ID? With the app has analytics that prove that that worker tapped on that video, watched it, tapped on that video, watched it. Yes, I had the training. I watched the videos. Did you tap on this ID? Yes, I tapped in South Carolina at 10:30 p.m., etc. So it's important that you have that as a defense, the due diligence, so you can protect yourself and your worker and your license, and most importantly, your communities. So Bob, in answer to your question, what we tell people to do is hold the ID as close to the face as possible.
Yep.
Don't follow other advice like, look at the forehead, look at the ears, look at the chin, look at the eyes, look at the, you can't see my ears right now. You're not going to ask me to move my hair. If I'm like, you know, with my hair down, you're not going to ask me to move my hair to see my forehead. I may be wearing contacts, glasses, it may be dark. There's one thing on the human face that never changes after the human reaches the teen years. You know what that is?
Your nose.
Nose. The nose never changes. So we have a video that shows people human facial recognition. You look at the length right between the eyes to the tip. That's the length of the nose, and the width, nostril to nostril. And you just visually make a triangle. And you look at the person next to you. You can instantly tell that nose is really short and squatty, or that nose is really wide. It doesn't really match. Great suggestion. Hold that ID up to that person's face. Make a triangle. Did the noses match? And then, of course, you still need to check the ID, but it's a great way. I'm glad you brought that up, Bob. And I'm looking at some of the questions here in the chat, just reading from the bottom up. One thing I train service and security details to do is observe body language and nonverbal behavior. Absolutely. That is the tribal behavior that I'm talking about. We understand as human beings confidence versus nervousness. And we see that from a number of different nuances, from body language, from eye movement to breathing. Those are all the nuances that books, training, scanners, not going to pick up. Human beings need to look at those. That's a brilliant. So thank you for saying that. Another question is, what is the average cost of a fake ID? Excuse my cough, one moment. I'll take a sip of coffee as the helicopter noise passes. We have helicopters circling us daily looking for fires, and they're also looking for trees in the wires. It's a very surreal experience here in California with these wildfires happening, so I apologize for that air background noise. But in answer to the question, what's the average cost of a fake ID? They can be as low as $50. They generally go up to about $200. The really, really sophisticated ones are $250, but on average, you get 2 for about $100, $100 to $120, and those IDs are sophisticated enough, and the law enforcement will tell you those IDs at the $100 range are sophisticated enough to pass a police scanner or a TSA scanner, depending. Now, TSA is used a minute. But the scanners that they're using, they're starting to pilot these in certain airports. Each one of those scanners costs $30,000, 0.000. I know of very few private venues that are able to afford that kind of a scanner. And most importantly, it's used in an environment with highly trained, uniformed armed guards. So somebody using a fake ID to gain alcohol, probably not the same situation. You're talking about a bouncer at the door who's not armed versus an entire airport of people. So very different scenario when you hear, oh, but the TSA uses scanners, completely different scenario than the sale and service of alcohol. But just a funny note, no, it's not funny. Wrong, absolutely wrong word for me to use, but interesting note, about 2 years ago, the Philadelphia airport did a sting with the federal government to catch fake IDs. In August, 1 24-hour period, guess how many fake IDs they found going through the airport? 1 24-hour period in Philadelphia. 500, just over 500 fake IDs in one airport in the United States. So the use of fake IDs is rampant. Okay, let's see. Reading another comment, law enforcement on fake ID detection. Also, we are watching the temporary cocktails go to legislation to make it, to make certain it sunsets June 2021. Yeah, all kinds of issues happening. All kinds of issues happening with temporary legislation, may or may not become permanent. And this is one of the reasons I emphasized in the presentation that we're struggling right now. People are really suffering and struggling to make a living. And if they are selling curbside or if they're delivering, it can happen if human beings have access to clear, current, and correct information. It is a safe way to happen, but we can't remove the humans from the ID checking process. And I'm really happy to see people noting that during the presentation in the chats here. So there's another question here. So it says, thank you, Lee, for that comment. He's going to forward information to all Illinois Basset trainers. I'm here for you. We will do whatever we can to help. Thank you so much. Greatly appreciated. And I'll circle back to you on that, Lee. Then we have a question here. What happens to your delivery if you refuse to have your personal identification scanned? That's a very, very good question. I often refuse that. I was at Target recently, and clearly I am over 21, wanted to buy a bottle of wine together with everything else I was buying, and they asked for ID. Showed her my ID. She took my ID and started to scan. I said, no, 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 please don't do that. She kept going. I said, no, no, please do not scan. She kept going. I nearly left across the counter and I said, no, no, do not scan my ID. I do not want you to scan my ID. She said, well, I can't sell it to you. I said, that's fine. I'll go to another store. So the answer is that's one representative example, but it's really up to the worker. If they are required to scan the ID and you say, no, you can't have my personally identifiable information, versus using another method. And I recommend, obviously, a methodology that doesn't put people at risk for identity theft and fraud. And I'm getting some compliments here. Thank you so much. I tell people all the time, I geek out on fake IDs. I am so passionate about preventing the use of fake IDs. I'm so happy for this experience and opportunity, and I greatly appreciate all the comments here. I'm looking through the comments. I want to be sure I haven't missed any. Let's see. Here we go. Any comments? We're going on 9:55, a little bit of time here. Michelle, are we okay on time?
Yeah, we have about 4 minutes left, and I didn't see any additional comments or questions. And again, I really appreciate you participating. And you mentioned that it's 9:56 there, but it's almost noon here. So
oh, got it.
because of the time difference. But again, I want to thank everyone for attending. And it may seem as though, because this is the College Town Summit, so why are we talking about Delaware? Why are we talking about California and other states? But in our college towns, maybe not as much with COVID, but we have all types of students that come from out of state and other places. Is that you?
I apologize. My phone just got set up. I apologize.
Okay, and so it just becomes important for, especially those in college towns, I think, to have an idea of what other, what's going on in other states as well.
Susan,
So,
That's exactly right. Yeah, because the
Susan,
college towns, yeah, sorry, Bob, go ahead.
I just got to tell, I spent the $10 for the app, and it's the best $10 you're ever going to spend. I'm just telling you guys, the information on the videos, I went through each one of them. I took my time. I went back and went through them. I learned. I've been doing this 37 years, and I learned a lot. And I don't think I'm foolish enough not to know a lot about IDs, but I learned a great deal from you, and that knowledge and the way you set it up made it easier for anybody to find fake IDs if they took the time. It's the best $10 I ever spent.
Thank you, Bob, so much. It's typically 100. We took it down to 10 to help everybody during COVID. Bob, I thank you so, so much for saying that, because we spent a lot of time and energy building this so anybody of any demographic across that very broad demographic of worker that sells and serves alcohol from 16 to 96, every educational background, every experience level, every cultural background, language issues. We built it in a way that anybody could understand it literally instantly. Those videos, the images, I appreciate you saying that, more than you know. And Michelle, you hit the nail on the head there with the college towns. These kids know to use an out-of-state ID, because the people who are working in the college bars, restaurants, delivery, etc., they're not going to recognize those ODs. But we got them. We got them. Tap on Delaware, tap on Texas, tap on Iowa. We have all 50 states. We got them.
Susan, what you did in your apps was that you broke down 2 or 3 items on each ID that specifically show the different covert, overt, and technical aspects of it. But for the most part, it's there are things that I didn't realize that were on the ID, and each state you did that in. Each state you found things that weren't there before, or were there that weren't noticed before. And that's the thing, that the learning aspect of that is phenomenal.
Thank you. Every state, every version that's currently in circulation, side by side, real, fake. One last answer to the question. People asked how long the discount's going to be in place and how do we get it? We're doing it for $10 indefinitely. We're helping people through this COVID pandemic. So it's $10, absolutely unlimited 24/7 use for that one person on any device that they use. And again, it's any device. You don't download it. You can use it for any device. We're going to do that indefinitely at www.id.training. That's it, id.training. Happy to help in any way we can.
well, thank you again. Thank everyone for attending. We'll send out a survey afterwards along with the links to the presenters' websites and their information. And if you would like to, especially if you would like to contact them after today's summit, please follow us on social media. We're on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram. And again, thank you for participating, being patient as I moved everyone around and breakout sessions and technical difficulties, but I really appreciate it. And then we'll also follow up with an additional basket session, because the conversation that was started, I could hear the tail end of it, and it was really good. So we want to continue that discussion so that we can continue to keep our students safe in Illinois. And that's it for today. And thank you again.
Thank you, Michelle. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Good job. Good job.
Thank you, Michelle. Good job.
Thank you.
We'll see you later.
See you then.
Okay.
Looking forward to it. Bye.
Me too.
Bye.
Bye-bye.